The shocking story behind the Hopkinsville Goblins. The creatures never stopped watching us. On a warm summer night in 1955, in the quiet farmlands of Kentucky, a terrified family claimed they were under siege. Not by neighbors, not by intruders, but by small glowing creatures with clawed hands and piercing yellow eyes. The Sutton farmhouse became the center of one of the strangest cases in American folklore, the Hopkinsville Goblins. Police swarmed the scene, newspapers exploded with headlines, and skeptics laughed it off as hysteria. But what if the truth was far darker than the story we've been told? Before we dive deeper, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps us bring more hidden stories like this to light. Because the Hopkinsville incident wasn't just a one-night encounter. Some details were buried, others dismissed, but whispers remained. Sightings in the woods, shadows peering from the tree line, creatures returning when no one was supposed to be watching. The legend never died. And maybe, just maybe, the creatures never left. What really happened that night? And why do locals still claim that something lingers on that land? Let's uncover the shocking truth. The story begins on August 21st, 1955, in a small farmhouse outside Hopkinsville, Kentucky. 11 people were inside, friends, neighbors, and children gathered after a long day. It should have been a quiet Sunday evening, but what followed became one of the most sensational tales in American folklore. Around 7 p.m., one of the family members, Billy Ray Taylor, went outside to fetch water from the well. He returned pale, trembling, and swore he had seen a strange glowing object streak across the sky, landing in a nearby field. At first, the others laughed it off, thinking he was joking. But within an hour, every laugh would vanish, replaced by fear. Soon, the dogs began barking furiously, refusing to go near the tree line. The Sutton family stepped outside and saw something moving in the shadows. Out of the brush emerged a small figure, no more than 3 feet tall. It had large, glowing eyes, long arms that reached nearly to ground, and ears that jutted like points. The creature seemed to glide rather than walk. Terrified, the men grabbed their shotguns and opened fire. The bullet struck, but instead of falling, the creature merely flipped, scrambled away, and returned minutes later as if unharmed. The family retreated into the house, barricading windows and doors. For hours, they claimed, the creature circled the farmhouse, peering into windows, scratching at walls, and climbing onto the roof. The sound of claws echoed overhead, sending chills down spines. Whenever one of the men fired, the being seemed to vanish into the night, only to reappear moments later at another window. To the Suttons, it felt less like a random visit, and more like a siege, a coordinated test of endurance against something they couldn't understand. Fear spread from room to room, and even the children whispered that the goblins were waiting for someone to open the door. By midnight, desperation pushed the family to action. They fled to the back door, sprinting across fields toward the police station in Hopkinsville. Bursting inside, they begged for help, claiming their home was under attack. Officers laughed nervously, unsure whether to believe such a wild tale. Still, given the family's visible terror, they agreed to investigate. Within minutes, patrol cars and state troopers drove out to the Sutton farm, headlights cutting through the dark. When they arrived, the house was quiet, but officers noticed bullet holes in the walls, shattered glass, and the shaken faces of the family members. Something had happened, but what? The police search revealed no creatures, no footprints, no tangible evidence beyond spent shells and damage to the farmhouse. After hours of inspection, authorities concluded there was nothing more to be done and left just before dawn. But according to the Suttons, that wasn't the end. When the last patrol car disappeared, the creatures returned, resuming their relentless watch until the sun finally rose. By morning, the story had spread to newspapers across the country. To the public, it was an amusing tale of little green men. To the Suttons, it was a nightmare that had only just begun. The Hopkinsville encounter didn't happen in a vacuum. The mid-1950s were the height of America's obsession with flying saucers. Just 8 years earlier, The famous Roswell incident had captured headlines, and by 1952 the U.S. Air Force had launched Project Blue Book to officially investigate UFO sightings. Across the country, reports of strange lights and creatures filled newspapers, often dismissed as hoaxes or hysteria. But Kentucky, with its endless farmland and deep woods, carried particular weight in these stories, a place where isolation meant strange events could unfold without interference. For the Suttons, their tale wasn't just a family legend. It was part of a nationwide fear. In rural communities, fear of the unknown mixed easily with folklore. Locals whispered of spirits in the woods and creatures that prowled at night. When news of goblins from Hopkinsville spread, older residents didn't immediately think of aliens. They thought of something closer, darker, rooted in generations of superstition. In fact, the very term goblin was chosen by the family, not reporters, reflecting how deeply the encounter fit into existing beliefs. This wasn't just science fiction. It was folklore colliding with modern anxieties, turning a farm into a battleground between myth and progress. The Air Force took the case seriously enough to dispatch investigators, filing it under Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a phrase that later became famous in Hollywood. But their conclusion was vague, attributing it to overactive imaginations and possibly owls mistaken for invaders. Yet this explanation raised more questions than answers. Why would multiple adults and children sustain such terror for hours over owls? Why the bullet holes, the frantic escape, the refusal of the family to profit from their story? The military may have wanted the public to move on, but silence only deepened the mystery. Mini twist. Records uncovered years later show that Project Blue Book files contain other reports from western Kentucky around the same time. Strange lights, hovering crafts, and even small humanoid figures were documented in surrounding towns. These cases, too, were quickly closed without firm answers. To conspiracy theorists, this was proof of a cover-up. The Hopkinsville siege wasn't an isolated anomaly, but part of a pattern that the government wanted hidden. For locals, it suggested something more frightening, that the creatures were still moving among them just beyond the fields. The cultural legacy of that night lingered far beyond Kentucky. The Hopkinsville Goblins became a fixture in UFO lore, inspiring books, documentaries, and even the design of grays in pop culture. But behind the humor of little green men lay a darker undertone. The Sutton family never recanted, never sought fame, and until their deaths maintained the same chilling story. The laughter of skeptics did nothing to erase their fear, and in that gap, between ridicule and silence, the legend grew stronger, carrying a warning that official explanations could not bury. The popular tale paints the Suttons as frightened farmers under siege for one night, but the details left out are far more disturbing. Witnesses described the beings not as harmless or curious, but as relentless predators. Their movements were calculated. They circled the farmhouse in silence, always returning after being shot, as though testing the family's defenses. Their glowing eyes seemed to hover in the darkness long before their bodies emerged. These weren't visitors who simply wandered into a farm. They behaved like hunters, patient and unshaken by gunfire, as if accustomed to resistance. What newspapers rarely mentioned was the length of the encounter. While most reports describe a few hours, the Suttons claimed the harassment stretched nearly until dawn. Each time the family thought it was over, scratching on the walls returned. Each time the children tried to sleep, a face would appear at the window. The repetition wasn't random. It carried an unsettling intelligence, a persistence that felt less like chance and more like strategy. By sunrise, the Suttons weren't merely exhausted. They were convinced the creatures hadn't retreated at all, but were waiting for another chance. Mini twist. Months later, neighbors whispered of sightings in the same woods, glowing eyes at night, strange figures crouching near barns. Some even claimed that livestock disappeared under mysterious circumstances. These accounts never made it into official reports, dismissed as exaggerations or folklore. But to those who lived nearby, the terror didn't vanish with the headlines. Instead, it spread quietly, unspoken but undeniable. The Hopkinsville Goblins became a phrase locals used in hushed tones, a reminder that something was still out there. Researchers revisiting the case decades later uncovered inconsistencies in police files. Several officers privately admitted being unsettled by what they saw that night. Claw marks, the family's genuine terror, and the strange glow that lingered in the fields. Yet these observations were scrubbed from public reports. Instead, officials leaned into ridicule, reducing the event to little green men. The truth is that the Suttons described silver-skinned creatures, not green, with a resilience that defied natural explanation. The mocking nickname was never theirs. It was a tool to trivialize, and perhaps the most chilling revelation. Family members confided later that the encounters didn't stop after that night. In the following weeks, they felt watched, saw flashes in the tree-line, and heard scratching on the roof. No reporter cared by then. The story had faded into curiosity. But the Suttons lived with the dread that the creatures had claimed their land, not merely visited it. To them, the Hopkinsville siege wasn't a single event. It was the beginning of a haunting that never truly ended. When we strip away the sensational headlines, the Hopkinsville Goblins can be seen as more than alien invaders. They embody symbols of fear itself, the terror of isolation, of being watched when you are most vulnerable. In folklore, goblins and spirits often tested the courage of families, appearing at thresholds and windows, never quite entering, but always reminding people that safety is fragile. For the Suttons, each knock on the roof, each glowing face at the glass, became a test of willpower. They were not just fighting creatures outside. They were fighting the collapse of certainty inside their own home. Psychologists who revisited the case decades later suggested that the encounter mirrored the anxieties of post-war America. The constant circling of the goblins was a reflection of the Cold War dread, an enemy that could strike at any time, never defeated, never gone. The creatures weren't merely extraterrestrial. They were projections of a culture living under constant surveillance, whether from foreign powers or from their own government. The Suttons' ordeal resonated because it touched a nerve larger than their farm. It was about the helplessness of ordinary people facing forces far beyond their control. Many twists. Silence itself became part of the story. The Air Force's dismissal, the police records erased, the ridicule from outsiders, all served to trap the Suttons in a deeper fear. If no one believed them, then they were left alone with whatever haunted their land. The silence of officials was louder than denial. It suggested knowledge too dangerous to reveal. That silence became a weight carried by the family, a secret they could never shake off. And in folklore, silence often hides truths more disturbing than the stories told aloud. On a symbolic level, the goblins' resilience, the way bullets bounced off them, carried a chilling message. They represented fears that could not be destroyed, no matter how many times you fought back. To the children, the creatures were like nightmares come alive, returning again and again until daylight broke. In that sense, the Hopkinsville Goblins weren't just intruders, but metaphors for trauma. You could push them away, but they always came back, stronger in the dark. The legend's endurance proves its power. Unlike other UFO stories that fade, the Hopkinsville siege continues to be retold because it taps into universal dread. It asks whether we're ever truly safe, whether our homes, our last refuge, can be breached by things unseen. The Suttons may have survived that night, but the story they carried became a burden shared by all who hear it. In their silence and in the laughter of skeptics, the creatures won something more lasting than fear. They became immortal symbols of the darkness that watches from the edges of our lives. The Hopkinsville Goblins remain one of the strangest and most unsettling stories in American folklore. For skeptics, it is just a tale of frightened farmers, owls mistaken for aliens, and newspapers hungry for headlines. But for those who look closer, the case resists dismissal. Too many details don't add up. Too many silences remain unexplained. The Sutton family gained nothing from their claims except ridicule and isolation. Yet until their final days, they never changed their testimony. That consistency forces us to ask, what did they truly see in those fields? The deeper truth is not whether the goblins were real in a physical sense, but what they represented. To the Suttons, they were the embodiment of terror that cannot be shaken off, the invasion of safety itself. To America, they mirrored Cold War paranoia and the suspicion that powers beyond ordinary people's reach were manipulating truth. And to folklore, they became eternal watchers, symbols of the fear that persists even after the lights are turned off. Whether supernatural, psychological, or cultural, The creatures left a mark that outlived the farm and those who survived that night. Mini twist. The phrase "they never left" is not just dramatic storytelling. Locals still whisper of strange lights, shadows crossing barns, and eyes glowing in the woods near Hopkinsville. Decades after the first encounter, the land retains its dread. If nothing remained, why do the stories persist? Why does the legend return generation after generation, adapting but never fading? Perhaps because the creatures found something they wanted, and perhaps because they were never truly gone. The Hopkinsville Goblins remind us that legends are not dead stories, but living fears. They adapt, they grow, and they continue to haunt the edges of belief. Even now, when science and skepticism dominate, the idea of being watched by something beyond our understanding is enough to keep the story alive. In the end, it is not just about one family in Kentucky. It is about us, and the things we cannot explain, the watchers in the dark that will never stop reminding us of our fragility. So as you finish this story, remember, the Sutton's nightmare may not be confined to the past. And the next time you walk to the quiet countryside or glimpse lights on the horizon, ask yourself, are the creatures still watching? If you want more hidden truths like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. More stories are coming, each darker than the last. And if you want to support this journey even further, consider becoming a member. Together, we'll uncover the legends the world tried to bury.